Hello, and welcome to The Writing Life, the podcast for anyone who writes. I'm Peggy.
And I'm Steph.
And we're talking to you from the National Centre for Writing in Norwich, UNESCO City of Literature.
And today, Peggy, we are delighted to welcome Singapore-based writer Clara Chow onto the podcast to share her insights into writing experimental fiction. Clara recently stayed with us in Norwich for a month-long writing residency, supported by the National Arts Council of Singapore.
And you know, it was so lovely to have Clara here with us in Norwich, and we had some lovely events together and conversations and cups of tea, because Clara is also a big tea fan. Like
fantastic. So you got on like a house on fire.
We did. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation with the fabulous novelist Megan Bradbury, who is in conversation here with Clara. Maybe just before we hand over to Megan, if you're feeling a little experimental or up for a new challenge, we recommend heading over to the NCW website to check out our Writing Life 30-day writing challenge.
Did you like my little experimental segue there, Peggy? I thought, what's more experimental for everyone than the Writing Life challenge?
I love it.
So starting on the 1st of January 2026 and running every day throughout the month, this is an online self-paced course, and it's a great opportunity to learn something new, to find inspiration, and to push your creativity to new heights. For only £30, so that's £1 each day, you'll receive an original writing exercise directly to your inbox. And once you've purchased the course, it's yours to keep, so you can keep going back to it time and time again. Plus, you can take part from anywhere in the world, and each daily exercise takes no more than 15 minutes.
Perfect ruse, to be fair. So that's you sold. So sign up for 1st January. Just head to nationalcenterforwriting.org.uk/challenge-January. Do it now.
Now, on to the main portion of today's episode and Clara's chat with Megan. Clara Chow works across genres of fiction, non-fiction, and poetry. Her strange experiments under Hermit Press include obscure prose chapbooks, such as The Melancholy of Broken Bollards. She's been a resident at the University of Iowa, Toji Cultural Center, Asean Literary Festival, and Shanghai Writers Program.
Clara sits down with writer and mentor Megan Bradbury to discuss how she defines experimental fiction and the importance of prioritising fun with your creative writing. Together, they touch on her month-long residency in Norwich, UNESCO City of Literature, writing as a collaborative project, and the role bilingualism plays in her creative work. And now, let's hand over to Clara Chow in conversation with Megan Bradbury.
Hello, Clara.
Hello, Megan.
Hello. It's such a pleasure to see you.
Yeah.
I'm really happy. We've had the pleasure of speaking a couple of times over the past few weeks. So I'm really, really keen to get into talking more detail about your writing today and to get some insights really in terms of your approach. And we're just going to dive right into it. I wanted to start by talking about your residency here in Norwich. So you've come from Singapore for a few weeks to work on a variety of projects. So how has that gone? What have you been doing? Can you describe some of the projects that you've been working on in that time?
I just want to say that it's a little bit sad because I was just packing my stuff in the cottage last night, and I was packing my desk and putting away my rock collection.
Amazing.
Yeah, and I'm like, I want to go home, but I'm going to really miss Norwich a lot.
Yeah.
So what I've been doing is going around town, meeting people, kind of like just making friends with random strangers on the street, and then taking train rides to Cromer, going to the beach, just soaking up like the English countryside.
Yeah.
And just learning so much by reading. I've been reading your book, Megan.
Oh,
yeah, and
nice.
it's really nice sitting in the cottage, kind of reading and following how another writer's mind works. And I feel like there's so much to learn from that. Even just going to the archives and digging up like a poet's papers and sort of reading the marginalia. And I'm like, I get it, right? And it's all about like thinking deeper and harder about what I am doing also. Yeah, this has been real education.
And do you think when you came here, because obviously with a residency, like one will begin a period of time, with a particular project in mind and a plan, and I'm very much one for over planning what is possible. And when I've done trips like this, what I realised, and it sounds like this might be part of your thought process too, that actually when you get into a place, you need time just to kind of settle in there. And actually a lot of the work that one might be doing for one's writing happens outside those spaces of actually sitting down at your desk and, sit and writing. Is that something that you found in this experience that you have, that almost... Not the anxiety of writing, I don't mean it quite like that, but the actual act of writing happens in lots of different ways. It's not just sitting there at the computer or with your pen. It's in the walking, it's in the talking to people,
Absolutely. Actually, Megan, I think you've known by now that I spend a lot of time avoiding writing.
I do know that, yes.
I procrastinate a lot. I'm just like, writing. Yeah, so you're absolutely right. Like walking, thinking, talking to people, that's where like the voice actually comes out. Like I actually hear myself when I talk to other people, and then I'm like, okay, I think I've worked out what I want to say, and then I go to the page. Like without that previous process, I think I'll just be staring at the blank page, and I'm like, I don't know what this is.
Yeah, because you're caught up in your head, aren't you? And that it's so interesting, particularly with the projects that you've been working on in terms of how they connect with readers and what readers actually physically do with the material, or your intention for what they will physically do with it. That you are, for the most part, and we'll get into this about whether this is also a feature specifically of experimental writing, and that's what we're kind of here to discuss. But that process of getting the writing out of the body almost and out of the mind in a conversation with someone else, where you see your thoughts reflected back, you see kind of how they connect with other things around you in your environment. And is that, for you, is that quite a conscious process? Do you know, for instance, when you came, you arrived here and you were like, well, I've got writing to do, but I'm going to go out into the city, because you were avoiding writing? Or did you feel, no, actually this is very much part of the process, that I will follow my instincts around the city into Cromer, back again? Is it part of do you think it's kind of embedded in your process in that way?
Okay, to be very honest,
there
is no plan. The plan is really to have no plan. But I find very interesting and useful the process of settling in, like you were mentioning, like, when you first get to a new place. And it actually really just takes about a month just to feel at home. It took me like 3 weeks to figure out how to walk around the city. Because I would do like this big, long, by the river. Yeah, but I think this process is important, right? The detours and this feeling of being unsettled. I like that feeling of being unsettled because, like in our conversation, I was saying that I grew up and I've lived in Singapore pretty much like my whole life. I know it like the back of my hand, right? I mean, it only takes 2 hours just to drive anywhere. So it's very important to me to feel lost and to feel and to rediscover the feeling of discovering something. Yeah. So I did really like being a fish out of water because suddenly I'm really like alert and I'm like, everything matters. Everything is significant. But how and why, right? So that was good for writing. It was really inspiring. Like if everything was new and interesting, then my job was really just to take it down and massage it into shape. I'm borrowing your phrase. Yes.
We like that. We like the massage. We like the physical analogy.
Yeah.
And that is what strikes me about that as well is how applicable that could be to projects, to any project. So I think years ago, before I started doing residencies or anything like that, my assumption of kind of research or visiting a place was for the purpose, it's because you want to find out something specific about that location that you're going to, or because you've lined up certain interviews, or you're going to visit archives or something like that. And it would never have occurred to me that actually you can go to a place because it happens to be either it's a residency one is one, or it just happens to be sort of happenstance. And what you can do, and I think what you described so well there, is that sense of just being in any other place can kind of press all those buttons and make you curious and alert, and then you use that energy to feed back into your project. So it doesn't have to be, for example, you don't have to be writing about Norwich to have that experience in Norwich. You can use the place almost like a just a sort of a starting point or a sort of sensory board for capturing that energy or that emotion that allows you to then enter a project. Is that how it feels?
Yeah. I want to say that I feel like the city is a muse.
Yes.
Right? And you're kind of writing love letters to it, but then the love letter says so much more about you than it does about the place. It's all about you, actually. It's about the lover, not the beloved. Yeah.
So it's a way of looking inwards then, in that way.
Yeah.
A way of seeing. And has that changed? I'm very interested because you've done multiple residencies in the United States, in Malaysia, in Australia. What have you noticed? What is the experience? Is it the same every time? So if you go on a residency, there's a certain amount of settling in, like you say. Have you been surprised by anything that has happened sort of afresh in each of those places? Is there something that you have? So, for instance, I'm thinking, as a champion of Norwich, particularly in the autumn, you've come at a brilliant time of year because it's just fabulous in the autumn. It's so beautiful, but all the medieval haunting of the place and the cobblestones, but also the culture and things that are coming in. It pokes you in a particular way that I'm guessing if you go to somewhere very remote, say another part of the world, it's poking you in a different way. Is that the case? How is Australia, for instance, as a comparison in terms of what kinds of senses you might have pressed? If that's really not the right way to say it.
I think that it's more the people who are there. So sometimes like the place might be a certain way, but because you're with a certain person, it really colors the entire place. So like specifically for New Orleans, even though New Orleans has like a certain flavor, it's very characteristic in its own way. But I was with like an Argentinian. So somehow, his Argentinianness kind of bled into New Orleans, and it just became this completely like strange creature. Yeah, so I found like in Norwich, because I made a friend, his name is Terry, and he's a really unique person. So Norwich became for me kind of tinged by his Terry-ness also, right? It will never be separate from the person I was with, But then it's not recoverable or it's not reproducible for any other person because you need to know Terry to know Norwich for me.
And that's really interesting because what you're saying here is that actually, so the place is important. Perhaps the defamiliarization that happens when you travel is important, but actually it's the connections with people, it's the conversations, it's the people itself that really root that down. Is that right? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
And the reason why, partly why I'm interested in this is that I think there are lots of people who are writing who may feel perhaps they're at the beginning of their careers or they're starting out and they're thinking about, how do I actually do this? In my experience with mentoring writers, quite often it's kind of a lack of confidence of how to begin or a lack of a sense of, how do I access or get that energy that you're talking about? How do I begin? And a lot of pressure can be put on the blank page and sitting down and knowing what the writing does and knowing all the conventions and, you have to have a character that does a certain thing and then they change by the end, blah, 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 all these kinds of technical approaches to how we might write. But of course, there's this whole other experience, which is far more kind of bodily and I don't know, philosophical and strange and curious. That is a difficult thing to talk about in a creative writing educational environment. But it's actually that is the key, isn't it? Is that how you feel? It's moving from the page into the world and back again. Actually, that is what's important. As a writing
I feel because I come from a journalism background that if you gather the material, like if you go out into the world and you have all this information, then it's really easy. The story writes itself. But if you don't have it, then you really have to work a lot harder. So between working hard and not working hard, I prefer not working hard, right? So if I had to sit down and kind of dream a story out from scratch, it's really difficult. Yeah. So I'm like, okay, I can still do it, but it really takes a lot out of me. So the other approach is just to go out and do something and then see if that can become the story. And that is the easier thing to read, which is why I do that. But of course, it's not for everyone. But
it depends what you're interested in. I mean, that's a difficult. Yeah, it's a difficult thing to recreate if you're writing particular high fantasy or something. If that kind of thing. But the kernels are always there, aren't they? Do you think?
Yeah, like if I were going to write high fantasy, I think what I would do is really to cosplay as an elf and go to New Zealand, and try and do that as much as possible just to see what will happen.
Yes,
right?
I mean, that should just generally be something that one does.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah, so it's almost like, through adjacency or through proximity to it that you can. And I'm thinking about, what people might interpret as their version of that, because obviously it's not easy to necessarily find the right elf costume and go to New Zealand. But what they might find in their own life that we'll talk more about that later, but that is a really interesting idea that you can, that might be how you do it, is that you don't necessarily start with a blank page. You don't necessarily start with this idea of this ethereal thing that's over there that's really alien and quite intimidating, that you break it down, you bring it closer to you somehow, you step into that. And do you think, so one of the sort of points of this conversation is to really talk about experimental writing generally. So I did want to talk about what you make of that term, experimental. And it is a term that you use, so I know that it's not a borrowed.
Is it a term that I use?
Yeah, on your website.
Oh my goodness.
On your website.
I'm going to go back and expunge
well,
it.
okay, on the website of the press that you run, which we'll talk about again in a little bit. But for years I would never have challenged this as a term at all until I went to see a talk with Lydia Davis, the quote experimental unquote writer from the United States, and she talked about how much she hated that term, because for her the term experiment sounds like it's something that's tried and then failed. that you're really kind of like trying to do something very deliberately obscure or difficult, for example, and that isn't necessarily the process. So I find that interesting. I don't know quite what my position on that term is, but I'm interested in your relationship with that, and whether that's an acknowledgement of your writing. Do you think of your writing as experimental? And if so, why? And if not, why?
Okay.
That is a starting point.
Okay. I feel like when I wrote that description on the website, experimental for me was simply just projects that I would start and not think too much about and just do. So experimental in the sense that like I don't know why I'm doing this,
yes.
But I just feel this compulsion to maybe look at broken bollards or, things that grow between the cracks. I just need to look at it, right? And I don't know where I'm going with this, and it might be like a decades long kind of thing, or it might be like 5 minutes. So I just lumped all these things under experimental. Yeah. But then since coming to Norwich, I realized that actually all over Norwich, people are doing experimental things.
Yes.
Yeah, they're putting out like zines. They're just kind of like, let's do it, right? And let's not overthink this. So what is experimental for me is actually very normal in Norwich. Yeah, so that's why I say I kind of like take it back a little bit, right? Yeah, but then on the other hand, I think experimental for me also means like things that go against the grain. So I came here to work on a project that has to do with book burning and fire. And every time I tell people about it, they are like, ooh, like taboo, right? I met someone who used to work for the Bodleian Library in Oxford. And then when I explained what I was doing, I kind of asked him whether he knew anybody who could supply me with paper that was very flammable so that you could like torch it. And he was like, every fiber of my being is against what you're doing, like it's like screaming to say that like, we are against book burning, but I will help you. So that's the kind of response that I want with my work. I want people to say like, every fiber is saying no, right?
Yeah.
Like, why are you doing this? But at the same time, it's getting them to think and to say that, okay, I can see where you're going with this. Like it's crazy, but I see the logic and let's pursue it to its rational end.
Yeah. And so let's talk a bit more about that project. It's something that I really want to go into because it's so, in a way, like so performative and it's a physical thing. So can you talk about flammable materials and your intention for that, and give us a sense of your thinking around how that works and what it's doing?
Okay, without giving too much away, right? It is a book that you are supposed to burn after you read it. And I've been working on this on and off since 2018, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Yep, that sounds about right. Yeah.
So it started off as joss paper poetry because like when people die in Asia, if you believe in ancestral worship or Taoism, you would burn joss paper as kind of like currency for them to spend in the afterlife. So I would write poetry on the joss paper and then it's single-use poetry. So like after you read it, you are supposed to kind of burn it. And the idea is that it's a sacrifice in a way. There's no other copy. So it's a contract between me and the reader. Like this poem is only for you, right? And if you commit it to memory, then it's never lost because you've memorized it. Yeah. So it was a way of exploring intimacy also. Like I was also kind of thinking about in the age of mechanical reproduction, right? Like books are just kind of commodities. So how can we make the reading experience a lot more intimate? And that was the the way that I came up with, which was to burn it.
Yeah.
So after the Jaws Favour Poetry, which kind of was performed in Malaysia, I then tried to kind of advance it a little bit more. So now it's gone into like stories. So I have a bunch of stories that are all about fire, and then it will sort of be meant for that same purpose.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. And you said that part of your research in coming to Norwich was to access some of the burnt books, the books that burnt in the library when the library burnt down. And what was that experience like? Were you able to get hold of them, or what was your intention? I mean, even just mentioning that as like a research project sounds amazing. Like I can imagine you sitting there, smelling this burned material and what that does to have that kind of, in your hands.
So we're talking on the morning of the 30th, right?
That's right.
And I've made an appointment to go down to the library on the 31st, which is my last day in Norwich.
Amazing. That's a great way to finish.
Yeah, it's my last hurrah, right? And the librarians have very kindly agreed to show me some of the material that was salvaged. So I'm really looking forward to that. It's my Halloween treat.
The fact that also that happens on Halloween is like a perfect addition. It's such an interesting project, and I think represents very well what you said earlier about this idea that actually when you want to think of an idea, actually a way to make it easier on yourself is to go out and meet people or cosplay the thing, or to align yourself. And in a way, this is a very kind of literal interpretation then of these themes actually, and what that conjures, and what you're talking about, this idea of, that you say, of impermanence, or how that changes your relationship to the text with your expectation that actually this is your last opportunity with it, and then it's gone, and how much that reflects love and relationships and various aspects like that, but also what your reactions to that project, and how clearly the burning of books is so closely aligned with censorship and dictatorial regimes and various things like that it has this other side, this darkness to it, which is really interesting. And I like the sense that almost the provocation of that proposal is part of the project. And is that how you feel? So it's not just the story, it's not just the burning, but it's also the interaction you are having around that in terms of reluctance or...
Yeah. So talking about it is, I think, part of what I'm doing also, because I feel like it's a way of addressing the taboo head on. So just opening the conversation. And then in the end, I feel it comes down to like a personal choice, right? Because if I say, please burn it, you then have to make the decision for yourself. And then
I don't know if I can.
But it's perfectly fine, because then you can see like on which side of the spectrum you land on, right? Like towards the kind of like, I really am against censorship, and I feel like everything should just stand. I respect the archives. Or do you believe in like, I respect the artist. I love the artist. I'll do what she asked me to do. Yeah, so many different possibilities, right? Yeah, so just to give another example of how this has manifested was also when I did long distance residency with a bunch of other writers. We each wrote one line in a poem, and then I typed it all up. And then I burned that also. And everyone had to memorize their lines so that when we met in the future, in the flesh, we had to say that line as though it's a password.
That's lovely.
And it did happen, because I then met one of the writers from Japan. And I was like, what's your line? And she said it, and I was like, this is my line. And we're like, yeah, members.
It's a great, when you talk about your projects, I always get this, we are approaching this from a position of talking about experimental writing, and I think in lots of people's minds, experimental might mean, difficult or challenging or, over their heads or something like that, or maybe even, self-involved, all these other kind of derogatory comments that go along with it. But the more I talk to you, the more, well, obviously, like I'm hearing, I think, well, yeah, that's that makes total sense, which is also a testament to the art itself, that if you can see almost the line through it, what its kind of core is, and there's a beating heart there, isn't there? There's something that you can touch. But I do feel that this is something that is important about this term experimental, and actually one of the problems with that term is because it raises these questions of kind of difficulty or challenge, but actually challenge is also about exploration. It's also about curiosity. It's also about play. And I think a lot of the writing, the projects that you're working on as you're describing them, there's a playfulness in that. You're not imposing an experimentalism on the reader. You're using different techniques as a way to provoke and think through a project. Would that be fair to say? That's what it is?
I think that like if there is one word I can use to sum up like the stuff that I do, it's fun. Yeah, like so experimental. Like, is it fun?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, let's do it. Right? If it's not fun, then okay, let's stop.
This is great, and this returns to this idea that if someone is interested, I work with lots of writers, and one of these things comes up is that quite often a writer will feel, for whatever reason, perhaps they haven't been able to write for a while because of other commitments. Perhaps it's something that they have they've gone to another career and then come back to writing when they're older. But if they have this instinct to be playful in the way that you're suggesting, the way that you're describing, it's almost like they have to work through a resistance against that, because general culture in a way doesn't want you to play too much, and certainly with writing there is this expectation that writing should be hard, and it is kind of hard, moderately hard, but that play isn't really part of it. That's maybe with visual arts, maybe visual artists are allowed to do that, but writers know it has to be kind of sort of studious and done in a very particular way. And one thing I've found with working with writers that's really just brilliant to see is that actually when you introduce playful aspects, not necessarily, obviously in burning, I don't necessarily go into set things on fire, that's not really good advice for general purposes, but once you start to ask those questions and actually allow that person the agency to make decisions like this about what their approach is, because of course experimentalism doesn't always mean form, does it? It means a process. It can mean process. So the writing itself actually could be very accessible and relatively conventional, but the process might be sort of experimental. So I'm very interested in that, and I think what you're describing about your process here is actually there's nothing like complicated about what you're saying here. It's asking questions, and I guess learning to trust your own instincts. That this is something I wanted to ask you, which because you work across lots of genres, fiction, non-fiction, poetry, because you edit as well, is it always clear to you when a project is its own project or whether it's part of something else? How do you, I'm assuming, and we've talked about this before, that you'll get ideas for lots of things. How do you make a decision about, well, actually, no, this is its own separate project, that it's not part of this, it's not part of that? I mean, do you know how you navigate those questions?
Yeah, I mean, just to go back a little bit to what you were saying before about how like writers sometimes think that writing has to be hard. Yeah, I don't think I ever really felt that writing needed to be hard. In fact, I was kind of surprised when writing became hard. I was like, I did not sign up for this, right? Like, I'm very lazy. Like, how did this thing become so hard? So I think a kind of litmus test to me sometimes as a writer, as someone who makes art, is to kind of revert to kind of like a child. Yeah, I like this idea that we are all eternal children. And so at the heart of what we do, it has to be something that a child would be able to understand. Like if you really drill down to it, right? Like, what is this text about? It is about something an emotion that you probably felt when you were like 7. And that's how I try and keep it clear for me, right? But back to like how I decide like what project belongs to what strand, I usually start with a concept. So I would say to myself like, okay, this is the fire book, right? This is the book about dying. This is the book about tea. And this is the book about clothes. And it would kind of go down these very kind of linear tracks, right? And I'll be like, okay, today I'm going to work on the fire thing, so I'll do that. And then today I'm going to work on the tea thing, and I'll do that. But then after coming here and meeting you, Megan, you have now introduced to me the idea of the master document. Yes, the master document, in which you dump everything and you kind of don't worry too much about where things belong. And I found that immensely helpful, right? Because I didn't have to sit there and wait for like, oh, is this a tea day? Or is this a fire day?
Every day is a tea day, surely.
Yeah, every day is an everything day, right? Like whatever you feel, just dump it into the master document. So the master document now is like maybe like 20 pages.
Amazing. That's so good to hear.
And it's got all kinds of things. And it's got like new things also, right? And as you mentioned, like you just wait for things to accumulate and then you see whether like there's enough and then you hive it off
Yeah.
Yeah. And what I do now is I now have different documents and then the master document, and then I keep hiving things off into the different documents.
Oh, this is such a dream. This when we talked about this, and I use this as such. I love this technique more. Like I said, my favourite thing of this is exactly what I would envisage, like of it working, like seeing it in situ, almost like kind of like a factory line, which again doesn't sound like playful, but actually for me, sounds like for you, this is actually really helpful process, because I think it gets you over the fear of that blank page, because there's never a blank page. It's 20 pages long and it keeps growing. But also, you know instinctively that you can't control that. That it is just a place to put ideas. And actually what happens is, as you say, is you start to see links and associations quite often by accident, because you're recording thoughts that actually you haven't already pre-designated to a particular folder or, a notebook or whatever. That actually a comment you write down without any intention of it being related to tea or fire, you might find actually has a link with it. It has this. So you can catch yourself unawares. And I'm very much of your disposition of kind of saying, like, if you can do it almost by accident, surely that's better than it being hard work, if it can just kind of fall into place. And also this is something that I think, particularly for writers who are early career writers, or perhaps stepping into a slightly different genre or something and they're a bit tentative, that it just relieves you of responsibility. At that point that actually you don't have to do anything with this material other than record it and read it back with a positive mind frame, And I don't know if you feel this, like, early drafts are difficult and it can take quite a long time to grow a healthy relationship with one's early drafts, rather than reading them and just going, oh my, what is this? This is awful. It takes all that responsibility away. Do you find that it just like, well, obviously it will be, this is about ideas, this is about concepts, it's about, maybe there's odd dialogue in there. Who is that person speaking? I don't know, but they could be it could be a part of my tea project, it could be part of my, those kinds of things. Yeah, it's fun, isn't it? It's fun.
Is, yeah. No, but I feel like I'm one of those weirdos who read early drafts or read back the drafts and kind of think, hey, I'm good.
Yeah, I do the same. Oh my goodness, I do exactly the same thing, and it gets me into trouble. But please carry on. Sorry.
Yeah. So I read this and I'm like, oh, okay, well, I'm a genius, right? But then since meeting you, Megan, what I think I do with early drafts now is to read back and kind of say, how is this leading in new directions? Like, yeah, okay, you're good, like sit down, megalomaniac. But yeah, how is this going to lead on, right? So that the project can become bigger than what you originally intended it to be. Because I kind of like to write short books, and I'm kind of like, okay, this is very much like the parameters I've set. And once I reach those parameters, I'm like, okay, job done, right?
Yep.
And then I'm like, okay, I can go and be lazy again.
Yep.
But then you've introduced me to the idea that if you read back to the early drafts, you can kind of see the strange things and the strange places where things are kind of wanting to break out and go elsewhere, right? And that can mean that this thing is not over yet. And I like that idea, right? Yeah, that the thing is not over. Yeah.
And it also means that your enthusiasm and your curiosity is perpetually renewed, because you're never settled as to what the thing is, and obviously at some point you have to look at it in that way. You have to kind of corral and neaten and all these sorts of things. But at least in the first instance, because if every time you're looking at it, it could be this or it could be this or it could be that, you maintain that curiosity and that sense of playfulness that is difficult to sustain over a long form, whether it's a novel or non-fiction or whatever it is. If it's over a period of time, you need to find that way of tapping into that energy every now and then. And I think part of this technique is a way to do that, to keep yourself going, so that you don't just kind of dissolve into a big puddle and I'm so pleased that's working out for you. That's really great. One of the things I wanted to ask, and this will lead into the reading that would be lovely to hear from your writing directly, is the role that bilingualism has for you in terms of your writing. Can you speak a little bit about that? What I'm interested in is this idea that, do you write differently in different languages? What does that do to your imagination? And is it part of this sort of playfulness? Does that add to that sense of inquisitiveness, or never being entirely steady about where one's feet are placed?
Okay. I mean, now that you mention it, I just feel like, the language, a different language is a different playground, right? Like suddenly you're like, okay, I can play over there. So I think my first language is actually Chinese, Mandarin, because that's what I speak at home with my parents. It's what my mother kind of taught everything to me in. And then English was kind of like the acquired tongue when you go and start like primary school. I think Yeah, so basically Chinese or Mandarin for me has always been the more emotional language. It's the one where, like my mother gets angry and she starts scolding everybody in Mandarin. And then when she gets even angrier, she scolds people in Teochew, which is the dialect that her parents use, right? So you kind of just go deeper and deeper down the language that is embedded in you. So I found myself doing that with my children also, right? I suddenly had this deep reserves of Teochew, which I didn't know, was still in me. But I really can't access that unless I'm very, very angry.
Which is apparent, is relatively regular in my experience.
Yeah. So in Chinese, and I wrote an essay about it in this book that I came out with called Lousy Love Poems. In Chinese, I am always 16 because that was the year where I stopped learning Chinese in school. I got like my GCE O levels and I was like, yay, okay, that's it, I'm done. And then I did English literature in university. So English is the one that is kind of, you think about concepts in like all the complicated thoughts are in English. But then all the emotions for me are actually in Chinese.
That's very interesting.
So a couple of years ago, I decided that I would just write poetry in Chinese because I suppose for me a poem is like a moment in time where you feel emotion intensely. So I need to do this in Chinese. I can't do this in like my working language, right? So the result is 几首烂情诗, which is self-translated into lousy love poems. Yeah, and I think there was a bit of back and forth on the title also because 烂情诗 actually is rotten love poems, but then I wanted lousy love poems for the alliteration. So I had this whole big debate with like some American friends who did not know Chinese, but we kind of went over this and they were like, like we kind of like the idea of rotten and garbage and I was like, but lousy love poem just sounds so much better. And so with the help of some of these friends, I kind of decided that no, I'm just going to do lousy love poems.
Yeah, it's a great title. Would you read?
Okay, so I'll read the one in Chinese and then I'll read the translation. And the translation was actually done with Google Translation because I got really tired of translating myself. I was like, I'm very lazy. I don't want to do this. So I made AI do it for me. And in a way, AI kind of mistranslated a lot of things, which I felt was just like another extension of the playground, right? Let's go there. So there are actually 3 poems in every poem. The one that was written originally in English in my head, which I then self-translated into Chinese somehow. And then the one that was translated back into English by AI.
Oh, so interesting. Oh, great.
Very convoluted.
Really great.
Okay, so I'll read this one called 多情的人来到多情的城，多情的人来到多情的城，满街都是暗号，印刷厂的壁画悄悄守着，我在这里等你，这里却是永定不了位的哪里？窗里的霓虹灯闪烁着，怎么爱你？是问题还是悲叹？随你。又有建筑工地的安全围墙，这里每个角落可以找到爱。都市盖大楼，几时做起媒婆了？我步行到某一个地点，路名隐藏着你，照张相为证据吧，保留当时的我，在众人寻你，纵横四海，潇洒的风姿，念你的我，投进念你的城，优雅的怀抱，我和他都喃喃自语，背熟没人看懂的符号。
Thank you.
Thank you. So the translation is, the sentimentalist comes to an amorous city. The sentimentalist comes to the amorous city. The streets are full of secret signs. The mural in the printing house is quietly guarding. I am waiting for you here. Here is where the GPS could never pinpoint. The neon lights in the window flicker. How to love you. A question or a lament? Up to you. The safety barrier at a construction site. You can find love at every corner. Since when did the metropolis play matchmaker? I walk to a certain place. The name of the road hides you. Let's snap a picture as proof, preserving me of this moment. Looking for you in the crowd all over the world. I, who miss you, am thrown into the city's graceful embrace. I murmur to it, memorizing symbols no one else comprehends.
That's beautiful. Thank you. It's so interesting. to hear the Chinese first. So I don't speak, I say obviously, I might speak Chinese, I don't speak Chinese, but you can hear, what's lovely about hearing it is the sounds. You can hear, which sounds are the same, and that's, it must be the challenge then of translating poetry is obviously how, there's sense. I mean, this is obviously true of prose as well. There is sense that you're translating, the words, but there's also the flavour of the language itself and the sounds and the alliteration and all those things, which must be so, I mean, I can't even imagine the challenge of that. And so, no wonder Google gets it wrong. I mean, it's hard, right? It's hard work. Maybe Google's quite lazy too. Who knows? It's so beautiful to hear the Chinese and to hear the inflections and the rhythm of it. But actually, that carries over in the English. It's interesting hearing you read the two side by side. There is a parallel there, just in the sound of it, which is really interesting to me. I love this idea that actually the different language allows you to access different emotions. And speaking of, as a writer, as a true representation of Britain, I have very poor school French. That's the limit of my language. So this is something that feels very exciting to me, that one could almost have a different toolkit, in your brain that you can access, or a different way in which a different vehicle for communication that you can access. This is something that the writer Jhumpa Lahiri writes a lot about in her experience of learning and writing in Italian, and what that does. And certainly in the sort of minimal languages that I've experienced, one finds automatically your body moves in a different way, you're expressing, all this. So of course it makes sense that in writing in different languages that you access different thoughts. But I love again that seems to be part of your toolkit, like that you have all these things that you could perhaps reach for as ways of prompting thought and prompting ideas, that you have the concept driven writing that perhaps is in English, but that actually if you really want to get down into it, you'll reach for your Mandarin, you'll go further. I've got this impression of your family at home, kind of as soon as they see you writing in that way, they go, oh no, I'm in trouble. No. That's okay.
Yeah, the funny thing is my parents don't read my writing.
Do they not?
Yeah. I mean, they have all my books in their house, but my dad, I once sent him a poem, and after that he said, please don't send any more. It's very hard to understand.
That's so sweet. That's really nice. Yeah, I think that's that could be a whole podcast in itself. I think that's a difficult thing for parents to step into, that kind of imaginative space, isn't it? Well, thank you for reading. It's so good to hear your voice. And this leads us nicely to these beautiful books. I have on my lap a copy of New Orleans, published by Hermit Press, which is publishing house that you run. And I'm interested in, so as your role, well, two things. One is your position as an editor, how that changes your relationship with, I guess, experimental literature in the first instance. I want to read from the website, sorry, which you clearly haven't read for a long time.
I need to update this website.
This is great. I love this description of what it does. So this is a description of Hermit Press. A small press based in Singapore, Hermit Press is a space for experimental text and artist books, a way of sharing knowledge and ideas to make objects outside of conventional publishing industries, a dream of getting niche titles into the hands of readers not afraid of the weird and absurd. And I love the weird and absurd there. It feels so great, because again, it's that sense of play, and it's that sense of, and they're really reaching for that childlike sort of state of mind, which I really love. Do you think that this is, I mean, what also interests me about this press is that you started it during the middle of the COVID pandemic, which is such a brilliant thing to do. So I'm interested in your reasoning for that. I'm guessing what that's about. I want to hear you talk about it. But also, I guess, the role of the publishing industry when it comes to experimental writing. Is that something that you feel that publishing generally ignores or has a difficult relationship with? What's your impression of experimental writing in that field?
I think I started a press because I kind of felt very impatient, and I got tired of waiting for traditional publishers to pick up my stuff. And then at the same time, it was the pandemic, so I was very free.
Yeah.
Sitting around at home. So I thought I will make a little book, and that first book was New Orleans. And I realized that if I didn't have to worry about sending it out to anybody, I actually became really honest in my writing. Yeah, just so that I knew that no one was going to ask me to change anything. So I would just be the boss. Yeah. So after I wrote it, I said, okay, let's lay it out. So I laid it out, and it looked a bit wonky, but I was like, okay, it's serviceable. And then I said, okay, let's just send it to the printer. So I did, but then I had cold feet in the middle, and I was like, oh no, I don't want anyone to read this book, because I realized that it is actually very honest. right? And there was no editor to keep me in check. So I was kind of like, okay, let's just send it to the bookshops, but just pray that no one reads it, no one buys it. But then one person did, and then he got in touch and he said he loved it. And suddenly it just seemed to me that if only one person liked it, that was enough. I was very happy with this one reader. And that was the moment when I realized that self-publishing was quite rewarding for me because it was this direct line to another person, and I didn't have to worry about all the kind of tying myself up into knots trying to fit the market.
Yes.
Or write to a certain sector or please the editor.
Yes.
I just want to sidetrack a bit. I went to the archives to look at some writers' manuscripts, and they had included all the correspondence with their publishers and the editors, and they had all these queries and all that. And someone had written in the margins of one of the queries, "For fuck's sake." Oh my God, like that's really, really funny because this person just really couldn't control themselves, right? Like this whole frustration with the editor not understanding what the book was about. And that he didn't even bother to scrub this when he donated his letters to the archives. He's like, yeah, just let it stand, Yeah, so in a way, I'm really glad that I would probably not have these moments because I am the person who is the last line of defense, and I get the book because I wrote it.
Yeah.
So I feel like maybe at some point I convinced myself. I am convincible the other way also that I didn't want to kind of play the game of conventional publishing anymore. I was very happy doing this weird thing of printing my own books and kind of taking them to the bookstores and being a saleswoman.
Yeah.
And what I've been doing in Norwich is kind of leaving my pamphlets all over town.
Yeah.
I put them in the Holloway without asking permission. Sorry, Holloway. I put them in libraries. Yeah, so if you find the little book of dying, that's me.
I love that. I mean, it's so well suited to Norwich particularly. But again, what you're remarking on there is this sense of almost bypassing conventional publishing as a way to link directly with readers, which is, I mean, I've been a bookseller, for many years in my life, and I read predominantly literary fiction, I guess, for pleasure. Small presses, self-published books of the kind that that you write. And I so love this book. That it's exciting. There are people there that want to read work like this, and that it's this frustration, I think, of knowing, I guess, how to source those and how to find them. And in this country, there are some fantastic independent publishers that are actively looking for books of an unconventional nature for that reason, because they understand, in Fitzcarraldo Editions, for instance, they have more Nobel Prize winning authors on their list than I think any other publisher, and it's just such an incredible list that they have. So there's clearly a readership, there's clearly an appreciation of it, and I love this sense that actually what you're talking about, the experience of publishing your own books not only makes those books stronger because you're able to do exactly what you want without compromising, but it also means that you are engaging with the book in a way that most writers won't do, which is, you're visiting a bookshop. I mean, this is almost a part of what it is, but not quite. You're visiting the bookshops, you're having to sort of describe what they are, you're having to bring your work to it, and I can see that must in a way feed into your writing, because again, it's about that personal contact, it's about walking the streets, it's about going into actual physical places. So it feels completely the right sort of pathway for you. And I think lots of people listening to this who are again interested in self-publishing for these reasons should be really inspired by this, because self-publishing doesn't mean a particular type. For people have sometimes a picture in their mind about what self-publishing means in terms of the quality of the work or how you distribute it and things. But these books, it's hard because I can't show anyone visibly what they look like, but you can look on the Hermit Press website to see they're so beautifully produced, and it feels like you have a real object and a real beautifully tactile object in your hand to read, which is part of the experience, would you say? I mean, that's the reading doesn't just begin and end with the words on the page, it's the whole shebang.
Yes. Yeah,
so
actually now that you mention it, I did have a lot of fun. So I designed 2 different covers. So this one had a different cover, but I ran out of the other cover.
You sold out.
Yeah, so yeah, that absolute control that you have right down to how you produce the images, thinking about like what paper stock to use, what cardstock, whether the book should have flaps. I'm a real paper nerd.
The answer to which is always yes.
Yes.
Always.
It's more expensive, but it's worth it. Yeah.
Oh, we love a flap. Absolutely love it. I also just quickly wanted to reference your book Caves as well, because it's such a beautiful. I just want to read the brief description at the end of this on your website, because it touches on so much of what we're talking about. So let me read this as a way of introducing this. So this is the description of your travel logbook, Caves. On her last trip abroad before the COVID-19 pandemic, Clara Chow visited Ipoh. Is that how you say it? Ipoh? Ipoh, sorry. Over the 3 days, she explored cave temples, bank vaults, and a supposedly haunted castle in the Malaysian state of Perak. Part travelogue, part meditation on the nature of caves and why we are drawn to them, the book is a quiet manifesto of independence from a solo traveller. Oh, that's such a good sentence. It's a quiet manifesto of independence from a solo traveller that I really love in relation to what you were talking about, because that in a way is the responsibility of a writer, but particularly a writer of experimental writing. You are a solo traveller in that you are very much forging your own path. You're creating it yourself. But what you've just demonstrated here, and I think in our conversation, what we keep coming back to is this idea that you're not really on your own, because the whole writing process is communal and collaborative in the way that you've described. We are talking to people, you're walking the streets, you are engaging with environments and new societies, new cultures, but also what you've just described there, the physical placing of one book that you've created in the hands of someone else, in a bookseller and a reader, therefore, is just a wonderful image, and perhaps isn't one that people would associate with experimental writing. It's not some crazy scientist in a room on their own, pontificating in a way that's, inaccessible for the world and then kind of enforcing it on the world. It's about collaboration and questions and curiosity and interaction, effectively, which feels just awesome. We've been talking for a while, but I wanted to, before we go, briefly talk about whether there are any tips or advice you would give to writers who perhaps they've gone through an education system where they don't quite fit, their writing doesn't quite fit, or they've had interactions with publishers, or their writing is unconventional. Perhaps they think, I don't know quite what I'm doing. What should they do? What's a good kind of way into beginning to do the sorts of things that you're talking about, to become comfortable with being odd, being playful, being mischievous, perhaps, in their writing?
I think it's very important to ask yourself if you believe in what you're doing, because it all boils down to like your conviction. Like if you feel like you believe very much in what you're writing and you believe that it's good, then that is enough reason to just keep going. Yeah, I think like I always have at the back of my mind this idea of Virginia Woolf.
Yeah.
And how like she just started Hogarth Press because she's like, okay, people don't get it, but I'll make you get it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, not to say that I am going to aspire to be, on that scale that she is, because Hogarth Press then just went on to champion so many other experimental writers. I feel like I am just me, and what I am capable of now is to just keep making the work that I like to make, and just putting it out like to the best of my capacity. I'm not gonna lie, it is very tiring to do the salesman thing, right? And sometimes sales are very, very bad. The books are all kind of like piled up and yellowing in my living room. But then always just think of that one reader who will find you, and that will be enough. Yeah.
That's such good advice. Thank you, Clara. I wondered would you read just a small section of New Orleans? We've been talking about that today, just to close.
Yeah. I was flipping through the book in the cottage, and I just decided that the end might be the best because I'm coming to my end of my time in Norwich, so near the end, right? Writing an ending is hard. Reliving a journey and reproducing it as a text, you are reminded how beautiful it was and how now it's over. And that in reconstructing that adventure, it has become an entirely different thing, a mirage, populated by fictional characters, yourself included. In a way, traveling to China, to Iowa, and then New Orleans has always been a deeper expedition of recovery, of rediscovering the joy of existing and connecting to others on a meaningful level. I returned home from the United States in mid-November 2019 at the end of the writing residency that brought me there. A day after touching down in Singapore, I take off again for Japan with my family. Our 8 days in Tokyo are fun but also miserable, with rain and illness from too many hours on back-to-back flights for me. Wandering the streets of Ueno, the gardens of the Imperial Palace, and the banks of the Sumida River near Shimbashi and Basho's Pond, I struggle with fitting back into my life as wife, mother, and obedient citizen. The childlike exuberance I felt in New Orleans, that sense of newness and obstinate flair, now seems a million miles away. Without it and the company I had, I worry that I will not be liable to rise anytime on my own. Homebound as the COVID-19 cases mount in Singapore, I am on an even keel. A fog seems to have lifted, and it's possible to look back and see how far I have come emotionally. From a sense of hopelessness about life, a directionless anger about things beyond my control, and unexplained physical aches and pains as old hurts kept me tightly coiled inside like a cobra, striking over and over again with so much venom at myself. Writing about New Orleans has given me something to look forward to every day, and with the benefit of hindsight, I can say those 4 days and nights were perfect in their brevity.
Thank you, Clara.
A big thank you to Clara Chow and Megan Bradbury for their time. If you have any questions or you want to get in touch with us, you can find us at Writers Centre on Instagram and Blue Sky. We're on Facebook, and you can sign up to the NCW newsletter at nationalcentreforwriting.org.uk.
As a registered UK charity, we rely on the generosity of our supporters to make our work possible. You can make a donation on the website by going to the Support Us page.
And if you enjoyed what you heard today, because of course you did, please do consider subscribing to the podcast and leaving us a 5-star rating and a lovely review, because this helps other listeners to find us.
Lovely old job, Steph. Okay, thanks again, everyone. Keep writing, and we will catch you on the next episode.